punish us for our beliefs. And the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, that we must continue to fight for our freedom in order to have it. And even though some may believe that the three branches of government reflect our views, that's not necessarily the case. But let me give you my own experiences. A number of years ago, I was praying in public across the street from an abortion clinic and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for simply praying. It's these kinds of experiences...
excuse me, you were sentenced to 6 months in jail for praying?
For praying.
Could we get a bit more detail about that?
Sure. A judge had signed an injunction stating that certain things could not be done within 100 feet of abortion clinics in that city, in Houston. And so 4 of us knelt and prayed across the street from the clinic, and the judge sentenced us to 6 months in jail and a $500 fine.
What law was that?
It was an injunction, and an injunction is essentially a judge-made law. It only applies to certain people. I was not named on the injunction, and yet the judge found me guilty of it. Thankfully, she was overturned by a higher court. But there are experiences like that throughout the United States where certain people are told and punished for acting out their beliefs. And it's those kinds of cases that make us very sensitive to protecting all of our liberties.
I can't help feeling the context must have been. Had that abortion clinic been threatened with firebombing or anything like that?
No, it had not. There were protests that were going on during that time. Now, the abortion clinic had argued to the judge that women would be intimidated from coming into the clinic if there were protesters outside. Well, at the same time that 4 of us were quietly kneeling in prayer with no signs or anything like that, there were about 100 pro-abortion demonstrators in front of the clinic blocking the entrance, screaming and yelling with signs and bullhorns. But it was those of us who were quietly kneeling in prayer who were sentenced to 6 months in jail. So I think maybe you can understand then why we are so sensitive to wanting to protect our religious freedoms and the ability to act on our consciences, because we do have cases like this where people have been punished for acting on their beliefs.
Yes, I can't comment on a particular anecdote like that, of course. Just want to come back one more time to the idea of teaching the controversy. In science, we're well used to controversy, and we have controversy all the time. Since Darwin's time, plenty of things that Darwin thought have now been shown to be wrong. I mean, Darwin was completely wrong about genetics, for example. And so there are modern controversies in Darwinism. There are controversies between people who think that natural selection is all important in driving evolution. And there are people who think that natural selection is only part of it, and that there are other things that drive evolution. Nobody seriously doubts the fact of evolution, but there are controversies about whether evolution is largely driven by natural selection or only partly driven by natural selection. For example, there are controversies about whether evolution goes smoothly and continuously, or whether it goes in jumps, whether there are sort of long periods where not much evolution happens, and then a rather sudden burst of evolution, which represent a kind of step in the fossil record. Those are genuine controversies, and of course it's extremely right and proper that children should be taught those controversies. But when you say teach the controversy, by which I think you mean the controversy between science on the one hand and probably biblical creation on the other, there are lots and lots of creation myths. I mean, the Genesis myth just happens to be the Babylonian Jewish myth, which for historical accident reasons is largely prevalent in the United States. But I mean, why not teach the Hindu myth that we're the product of a cosmic butter churn, or an Australian Aboriginal myth that we come from the dream time? Why pick on the Judeo-Christian Babylonian myth?
Well, we have argued when we say teach the controversies in evolution. And to teach the evidence that shows intelligent design. I'm not aware of people arguing that they ought to, that in public schools it ought to be taught the biblical accounts of creation. So when we say teach the controversy, we mean teach all the evidence, including the evidence that goes against evolution, teach the evidence for intelligent design.
Who do you think the intelligent designer was?
Well, see, that's something that I think scientists can debate. But the idea that there was an intelligent design to the process. In fact, what you've mentioned regarding even natural selection, and that there could be somebody or something that put all these laws in place that now the world is operating off of, does back up this idea that it was a being, an intelligent being, that caused all this, the whole world, to happen.
Yes, I mean that's what a bishop might say. I wouldn't say that, but there are plenty of Christians who would say that. Wouldn't your life be a lot easier if you went along with the bishops and said the evidence in favor of the fact of evolution is overwhelming, so let's accept it and bring God in there?
I think one issue is this idea that that we take orders from a hierarchy.
Okay, no,
and there are some bishops that believe like you do, and there are other bishops that don't,
yes,
that believe differently.
No.
And so it's easy to select those who believe like you do and rely wholly as if they speak for everyone.
Yes.
But those bishops don't speak for all Christian
okay, I mean,
leaders.
I accept that, and I would hate to suggest that you take orders from authority. I do wish you look at the facts a bit more, though. I mean, they are actually very interesting. I mean, you'd be fascinated. Just read a book.
I think, well, I find that to be quite demeaning to claim that we don't read books, or that we don't know what evolution is, when in fact most of us have been through the museums that you and your folks have put together.
Yes.
It probably would be helpful to the dialogue if the evolutionists were not so demeaning and degrading to others. And again, I kind of go back to perhaps that comes out of the philosophy of evolution, that some people are better than others.
You said there was no evidence of intermediates in evolution, and I told you about 5 fossils.
And what I say, if that were and if those were valid, there would be tons of evidence, because there are so many different species that there ought to be tons of evidence, even let's say for 1% of the macro evolution that's taken place, there should be evidence. But there's not even 1%, let alone 10 or 50 or 70%.
There is a massive amount of evidence. You just need to go into the books and go into the museums and look at it. It's there.
Yes, and
you're believing people who are telling you there's only 1%.
Oh, and again, I go back to it's very demeaning to say that we only believe what we believe because we've been told that, and yet we have evolutionary scientists who want to be the ones to tell all of society what is fact and what's not fact, and to censor out information that is inconvenient.
I'm asking you to go and look at the facts. I don't want you to believe me. Just go and look at the facts.
Yes, and I have. And again, I go back to let's look at the differences of what your philosophy lives out, the evolutionary philosophy, and how does that end up working out in a society?
Yeah, I've accepted that if we worked out society on Darwinian grounds, it would be a very, very unpleasant right-wing society. I've accepted that.
Well, I don't know right-wing. It seems to be that you fall back on ad hominem, name-calling.
All right, then, free market,
even
ruthless trampling on the poor. That's what it would be like.
What I find interesting, though, is
a Darwinian society. I don't want a Darwinian society.
Communism was based on atheistic beliefs and evolutionary beliefs, and communism resulted in a decade that had more deaths, over 100 million deaths committed because of communism, than all the killings combined of every century prior to that. So when you talk about socialism, which is a close cousin to communism, being a better way of life, I look back on what beliefs was communism and socialism based on, and the atheistic belief that human beings are not distinct and should not be respected.
When you say distinct, do you mean distinct from each other, or do you mean when human beings are not distinct from each other? Is that what you mean?
Human beings are created as distinct from one another and should be treated with respect, even if they are not utilitarian, even if they are not able to provide something to society. The atheistic belief, the evolutionary belief, is that you're unnecessary and unneeded if you cannot provide something for society.
That's an extraordinary thing to say. I mean, you equated atheistic with evolutionary. That means that's wiping out most of the bishops. they wouldn't take very kindly to that. I know
Well,
not all bishops.
I've recognized that there are varying degrees within the evolutionary beliefs. It's the hardcore evolutionists that reject the idea of a creator that then pave the foundation for very brutal societies.
Well, I